You know that feeling when the phone rings at 3 a.m.? Not the casual call from a friend who forgot about time zones. The other kind. The kind that makes your stomach drop before you even pick it up. Because somewhere deep down you already know. Someone is dead. Someone you love. Someone who needed you. And you weren't there. This is the last call. Detective Marcus Cole had been a cop for 22 years. He'd seen bodies pulled from rivers, from basements, from shallow graves in the woods. He'd looked into the eyes of killers and the faces of the grieving. But nothing prepared him for the call that came on a rain-soaked Tuesday in November. The victim was a woman named Eleanor Vance, 47, high school, English teacher, mother of 2. Found in her own kitchen with a single gunshot wound to the chest. The door was locked from the inside. No signs of forced entry. No weapon at the scene. The medical examiner put time of death at approximately 2:15 a.m. Marcus stood in the yellow tape, rain dripping from the brim of his hat, and stared at the house. It was a modest 2-story in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The kind of street where neighbors wave and kids ride. Bikes and nothing bad is supposed to happen. But something bad had happened. And the worst part? Eleanor Vance had called 911 at 2:17 a.m., 2 minutes after she was shot. The call lasted 11 seconds. Please, he's here. He's inside the house. I don't... Then the line went dead. No screams, no struggle. Just that single desperate plea, and the sound of a door closing. Marcus had listened to the recording 7 times. He couldn't shake the feeling that Eleanor wasn't talking to the dispatcher. She was talking to someone else. Someone in the room with her. Someone who was listening. The case landed on his desk because he was the senior detective in the precinct. But the truth was, Marcus had requested it. Because he knew Eleanor Vance. Not personally, he'd never met her. But his daughter Sophie had been in her English class 2 years ago. Eleanor had written a letter to Marcus after Sophie graduated, telling him what a bright, kind girl she was. How proud he should be. He'd kept that letter in his desk drawer. He'd never told Sophie. It just felt like something worth holding on to. Now Eleanor Vance was dead, and Marcus couldn't stop thinking about the letter, about the way she'd signed it. With gratitude, Eleanor. He needed to find out who did this. Not just for justice. For closure. For the daughter who would never get another letter from her favorite teacher. The investigation started with the husband, Thomas Vance, 52. Insurance adjuster. Alibi. He was at a business dinner in the city, 70 miles away, confirmed by 3 colleagues and a hotel receipt. But Marcus knew that alibis could be bought and marriages could hide secrets. Thomas Vance sat in the interrogation room, pale and hollow-eyed. He hadn't slept. He hadn't eaten. When Marcus walked in, Thomas looked up and said, "I should have been there. I should have been home. I told her I'd be back by midnight. I told her to lock the doors." "Did she?" Marcus asked. Thomas shook his head. Eleanor never locked the doors. She said it made her feel trapped. I argued with her about it for years. She said no one in this neighborhood would ever hurt her. Marcus wrote the words down. No one in this neighborhood. He thought about the locked door at the crime scene. It had been locked from the inside. So either Eleanor had locked it after she was shot, unlikely, or the killer had locked it on their way out. But why? To make it look like suicide? To confuse the investigation? Or was it something else? He turned to the other evidence. The phone records. The 911 call. The time gap. 2 minutes between the gunshot and the call. What had happened in those 2 minutes? Why had Eleanor waited? Why hadn't she run? The answer came from the neighbor. A retired nurse named Margaret Reyes. Margaret had heard a car pull away at 2:20 a.m. She'd looked out her window and seen a dark sedan, no plates, heading toward the highway. She'd thought nothing of it at the time. People come and go at all. Hours in a neighborhood with shift workers. But after she heard about Eleanor, she called the police. Marcus had the sedan traced. It was a rental. Picked up 2 days earlier at the airport. The name on the rental agreement was fake. But the credit card used to pay for it belonged to a man named Daniel Cross. Daniel Cross was a convicted felon with a history of breaking and entering. He'd been released from prison 6 months ago. And he'd been seen in the neighborhood by Margaret Reyes the week before. Eleanor's murder. Daniel Cross became the prime suspect. But Marcus wasn't convinced. Because Daniel Cross had no connection to Eleanor Vance, no history, no motive, and the locked door didn't fit his MO. Cross was a smash and grab artist. He didn't lock doors behind him. He didn't leave scenes clean. Marcus stared at the case file at 2 a.m. alone in his office, the rain still beating against the window. Something was wrong. Something was missing. And then he found it. Eleanor Vance's phone records showed a call, not the 911 call, but another one, at 1:58 a.m., 17 minutes before she was shot. The call lasted 43 seconds. The number was unregistered, untraceable, but the call had come from inside the house. Someone had been in Eleanor's home 17 minutes before she died. Someone had called her, and she'd answered. Marcus closed the file, leaned back in his chair, and stared at the ceiling. The rain had stopped. The night was silent. And somewhere out there, a killer was sleeping soundly, convinced they'd gotten away with it. But Marcus Cole had been a cop for 22 years. He knew that no one really gets away. They just get comfortable. They make mistakes. They forget that doors can be unlocked from the outside if you have the right key. That's the end of part A. Join me for part B, the concluding chapter, where Marcus discovers the truth about Eleanor Vance's last call. You know that moment when the truth finally clicks into place? When all the pieces that didn't make sense suddenly form a picture. You should have seen all along. It doesn't feel like victory. It feels like falling. Because the truth, once it's out, can never be put back. Welcome back to The Last Call. Marcus Cole had been staring at the case file for 3 hours when the realization hit him. The unregistered call at 1:58 a.m., the locked door. The 2-minute gap between gunshot and the 911 call. The way Eleanor had said, "He's here. He's inside the house." Not, "Someone is here." Not, "An intruder." Eleanor had known who was coming. She'd been waiting for him. Marcus pulled the phone records again. He cross-referenced the unregistered number with every known associate of Daniel. Cross, nothing matched. Then he checked the victim's personal life. Calls to her sister. Calls to her students. Calls to a therapist named Dr. Mira Hale. Eleanor had been seeing a therapist for 6 months. The reason? A stalker. Someone who'd been leaving notes in her mailbox. Someone who'd been watching her house at night. Someone who'd sent her a single, chilling text message 2 days before she died. "I want to hear your voice one more time." Eleanor had told her therapist everything, except the identity of the stalker. She'd been too scared to say his name. Too scared that naming him would make him real, would invite him closer. Marcus drove to the therapist's office at 7 a.m. Dr. Mira Hale was a woman in her late 40s, calm and composed, the kind of person who'd heard every kind of confession. She didn't want to break confidentiality, but when Marcus told her that Eleanor was dead, she opened her file. "He was a former student," Mira said quietly. "His name is Kyle Anderson. He was in Eleanor's class 4 years ago. He developed an obsession. She reported it to the school, but he was already 18. They couldn't do much. He graduated, moved away. She thought it was over." "It wasn't," Marcus said. "No, he came back 6 months ago. Started sending letters, then texts. Then he started appearing at her house. She'd look out the window and see him standing across the street. She called the police twice, but he was gone by the time they arrived. No evidence, no witnesses." Mira paused. She was terrified, detective. She said he told her that if she ever told anyone his name, he'd make sure she couldn't speak at all. Marcus stood up. "Did she tell you how he got into the house?" Mira shook her head. But she did say something odd. She said he knew where she kept the spare key. She'd hidden it under a rock in the garden. He found it. She moved it. He found it again. The spare key, the locked door from the inside. Kyle Anderson hadn't broken in. He'd let himself in. And after he shot Eleanor, he'd locked the door behind him, not to confuse the investigation, but to make it look like she'd let him in willingly, like it was a suicide, or a domestic incident. Anything but the truth. Marcus put out an APB on Kyle Anderson. He was found 3 hours later at a motel on the outskirts of town. He didn't run, didn't fight. He just sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall and said, "She promised she'd never leave." In interrogation, Kyle Anderson confessed. He told Marcus everything. The obsession, the letters, the night he watched. Eleanor's husband left for his business trip and knew she'd be alone. He'd waited until 1:58 a.m. to call her. He said he wanted to hear her voice one last time before he came inside. He wanted to know if she'd be scared. Was she? Marcus asked. Kyle smiled. It was the emptiest smile Marcus had ever seen. She knew it was me. She knew I'd come. She told me she was sorry. She said she'd been wrong to push me away. She wanted to make things right. Marcus felt his stomach turn. Eleanor Vance hadn't been afraid. She'd been trying to talk him down. She'd let him in because she believed, even in that moment, that she could save him. That she could reach the broken boy inside the man. And she almost did. Kyle sat in the kitchen with her for 17 minutes. They talked. She listened. She told him he could get help. That it wasn't too late. But then he saw the phone in her hand. She'd been about to call for help. Not the police, but someone else. Her husband. And in that moment, Kyle Anderson realized he wasn't special. He was just another person she was trying to save. He took the gun from his jacket. He shot her once. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She just looked at him with eyes full of sorrow. And she whispered, "I'm sorry too." Then she made the call. The 911 call, not to save herself. She knew she was dying. She made the call so that someone would know. So that her family would have answers. Marcus looked at the young man across the table. 22 years old. Bright eyes that had turned hollow. A future that was over before it began. And all because he couldn't let go of something that was never his. The case was closed. Kyle Anderson was convicted of second-degree murder. He'll spend the rest of his life in prison, replaying that night over and over, wondering if he could have walked away. Marcus drove to Sophie's apartment that evening. He knocked on the door, and when she opened it, he just stood there for a long moment. Then he said, "Your teacher, Mrs. Vance. She was a good person." Sophie nodded. "I know. She saved me once. I was going through a bad time, and she wrote me a letter, told me I was worth something, that I mattered." Marcus smiled. "She wrote me one too, after you graduated. She was proud of you, Sophie. I want you to know that." Sophie hugged her father, and for a moment, the weight of the case lifted. But later that night, alone in his apartment, Marcus sat in the dark and thought about Eleanor Vance, about the last call she made. Not the one to 911, but the one at 1:58 a.m. The one where she'd answered the phone, knowing who it was, knowing what was coming. She could have hung up. She could have called the police. She could have saved herself. But she didn't, because Eleanor Vance believed that everyone could be reached, that no one was beyond saving. And she paid for that belief with her life. So here's the question. Sitting there in your own quiet room, with the phone silent beside you, who would you answer for? Who would you let in, even knowing the cost? And when the call comes at 3 a.m., the one that changes everything, will you pick up or will you let it ring? This has been The Last Call. Thank you for listening.